For 73 long years, St. Maron's Church had stood at the very edge of the village, leaning slightly forward, as though it were listening to every whisper from the world outside. The church had once been the heart of the community, a place where children were baptized, where weddings ended with joyous singing, and where funerals were met with trembling prayers. But that was before the fire, before the priest vanished, before the elders sealed the building and swore never to speak of that night again. Since then, St. Maron's had become nothing more than a shadow in the mist, a forgotten relic of another time. The doors were bolted shut, the windows boarded, and the bell tower, well, the bell tower had been declared too dangerous to enter. The wooden ladder inside had collapsed years ago, leaving the bronze bell trapped at the top like a silent relic from an era gone by. The bell's rope had been cut deliberately, years before the fire, and every villager knew why. Or rather, they thought they knew. And yet, despite all that, the church for decades, the bell began to ring again. It started on a cold night in early December, when the wind seemed to howl with an unusual sharpness. The village had gone to sleep as usual. Lanterns out, children poked in, dogs curled beneath their owners' beds. But at exactly midnight, when the village clock struck 12, the bell rang. One heavy, thunderous toll, followed by another and another, 12 times in total. Slow, measured, perfect, as though someone trained in the art of ringing it was pulling the rope. Windows flew open across the village. Lanterns were lit in a panic. People stumbled out of their homes, still half asleep, shouting to one another if no one dared go near the church. Not that night. By morning, however, a small group of elders, armed with walking sticks, lanterns, and faith, decided to inspect the place. They approached the church slowly, their breaths forming clouds in the cold morning air. The doors were still bolted shut from the outside. The windows remained untouched, their wooden boards rotting but unbroken. The dust around the entrance was thick, completely undisturbed. Not a single footprint. Inside the church, it was obvious that no one had entered. The pews were coated in decades of dust. Spider webs hung from the rafters. The altar cloth, though eaten away by time, was still folded the same way it had been the night the church was abandoned. Everything was still, silent, dead. And yet, the bell had rung. One elder suggested perhaps it was the wind. Another insisted it was probably a group of mischievous children. A third whispered what the others were secretly thinking. The priest is back. The others immediately silenced him. No one wanted to revisit that night. The night the priest disappeared. The night the fire consumed half the church. The night, some say, an unholy cry echoed from the bell tower. But the bell rang again the following night. Midnight, exactly. 12 slow tolls, each one seeming heavier than the one before. Villagers gathered in clusters, clutching their children, whispering prayers, crossing themselves. The bravest young men in the village, or perhaps the most foolish, crept toward the church after the second night's ringing. They carried lanterns, machetes, and stones for courage. They circled the church 3 times, checking every inch. Still no footprints. Still no sign of forced entry. No cracks in the boards. No open door. Nothing. And yet the bell had rung. By the third night, no one dared sleep. The villagers waited in silence, staring at the horizon as the clock in the square ticked closer to midnight. When the bell rang again, the dogs began to whine. But this night was different. When the third toll echoed through the village, the temperature seemed to drop. On the sixth toll, the lanterns in several homes flickered and went out. On the 10th toll, some villagers reported seeing shadows moving in the fog. Shadows with no bodies to cast them. When the 12th toll died away, the fog thickened around the church, almost as though it were breathing. And then, nothing, silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the tense, heavy kind that feels like something is waiting. Watching. Listening. By morning, the elders were done pretending. They gathered the entire village in the square, and they finally spoke about the night they had sworn never to mention again. The priest, they explained, had not simply vanished during the fire. He had been changing in ways no human should. The last night they saw him alive, he had rung the church bell 12 times, the final time with his bare, bleeding hands, and then shouted a warning. Mustn't the bell rings again. Run. But the fire broke out minutes later, destroying half the church and leaving nothing but ashes where the priest had been standing. No body was ever found. No one knew if he'd died. No one knew if he'd been taken. And now the bell had returned. The same pattern, the same timing, the same 12 tolls. As though someone at Krapalma or something was continuing what the priest started. But the strangest part, on the morning after the third ringing, a single symbol was found burned into the ground behind the church. A symbol that matched an engraving on the priest's old prayer book. The book they buried to stop the whispers. Now that symbol was back, and the elders knew what it meant. The bell was not a warning for the villagers. The bell was calling something, summoning it, and it was getting closer. The villagers argued throughout the morning. Some insisted they leave. Others believed abandoning the village would only anger whatever was ringing that bell. A few claimed it was a divine sign, though no one could explain why a divine sign would arrive in the form of midnight terror. But when the elders revealed the truth, the real truth, the village fell silent. They retrieved a dusty wooden box from beneath the town hall. Inside it lay the priest's old prayer book, wrapped in tattered cloth. No one had touched it since the night he vanished. "Don't open it," one elder warned, but another shook his head. "We have no choice." He peeled the cloth back, and there it was. The same symbol burned into the ground behind the church, inked violently across the first page. A symbol the priest had drawn himself on the night of the fire. Right before he rang the bell 12 times. The symbol looked like a circle, cracked down the middle, with a line stretching outward like a claw. It was not from any religious text the villagers recognized. Not Christian, not pagan, not ancient folklore. It was something else, something that made even the bravest feel cold inside. Beneath the symbol, the priest had written a single sentence. It warns the bell. No one knew what it referred to. No one wanted to know, But the priest had spent months before the fire researching something deeply unsettling. Strange myths, old burial grounds, stories about voices heard beneath the earth. The elders had dismissed him, thinking he was simply overwhelmed by grief after losing a young boy from the church. But now they wondered if the priest had been right, if something had been moving beneath Marines long before they shut the doors. Something waiting, watching, listening, and now the bell was calling it back. By the time the fourth night arrived, the entire village had gathered in the square. No one wanted to be alone when the bell began to ring. Mothers clutched their children. Men stood with lanterns raised. Elders whispered prayers into trembling hands. At 11:59, the wind died. Not slowed, not faded. And then a single lantern sputtered back to life, only one, held by the boldest villager, a blind woman named Mara, who hadn't opened her eyes in nearly 2 decades. The flame in her lantern glowed unnaturally bright, and she lifted her face toward the church as if she could see it. What they discovered made their blood run cold. The symbol, the cracked circle, had spread. Where the earth had been burned behind the church, the mark was now twice its size, carved deeper, darker, as though something beneath the soil had scraped it larger with clawed fingers. The wood of the church door, untouched for 73 years, now bore 3 long vertical scratches, perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, each one nearly a foot deep. No human hand could make marks like that. But the worst discovery was inside. Because when they unbolted the church doors and stepped into the dusty darkness, all the pews, every single one, had been rearranged. They now formed a perfect circle around the altar. And on the altar lay something wrapped in black cloth. Inside was a bell's robe, small, shaking faintly. One villager, trembling, unwrapped it. Inside was a bell robe, a brand new robe. White, freshly cut at one end, as though something had dragged it up from the earth and placed it there. Something that wanted the bell working again. Something that needed it. The villagers demanded answers, and the elders could no longer hide their secrets. The priest, they explained, had not gone mad before the fire. He had been trying to protect the village. He had discovered that the land beneath St. Marin's was once a burial ground, not for humans, but for something older. Something worshipped by an ancient cult that believed the dead could not fully rest, unless called by a ceremonial bell. The problem was, the bell was never supposed to ring by accident, and it was never supposed to ring 12 times. That number was meant for summoning. The priest, sensing something had awakened beneath the church, had rung the bell deliberately, trying to complete the summoning ritual himself. Why? To trap whatever was rising inside the church, sealing it inside with him. But the fire disrupted the ritual. The summoning was left incomplete, and now 73 years later, Hyphenwad Belikand meet. He had discovered that the land beneath St. Marin's was once a burial ground, not for humans, but for something older. Something worshipped by an ancient cult that believed the dead could not fully rest, unless called by a ceremonial bell. The problem was, the bell was never supposed to ring by accident, and it was never supposed to ring 12 times. That number was meant for summoning. The priest, sensing something had awakened beneath the church, had rung the bell deliberately, trying to complete the summoning ritual himself. Why? To trap whatever was rising inside the church, sealing it inside with him. But the fire disrupted the ritual. The summoning was left incomplete, and now 73 years later, Hyphenward Belicand meet, and each night it rang. The thing beneath the ground came closer to breaking free. That evening, as the villagers gathered to discuss their plan, the blind woman Mara suddenly spoke again. Her voice was steady, cold. Tonight the bell will not ring 12 times. Everyone turned to her. What do you mean? Someone asked. She lifted her head, eyes still lifeless and grey. Tonight, she whispered, it will ring 13. And then she added something no one wanted to hear. And on the 13th toll, something will answer. The villagers spent the entire day preparing for the night ahead. They boarded windows, reinforced doors, gathered lanterns, candles, salt, anything they believed could protect them from whatever waited beneath the church. But despite all their efforts, a heavy dread settled over the village, like a thick fog. Animals grew restless, dogs pacing in circles, chickens refusing to enter their coops. No one spoke of it openly, but every villager was thinking the same thing. No one had ever heard of the bell ringing 13 times, and no one wanted to know what it meant. The elders gathered inside the town hall. Survivors of the priestess era, the few who still remembered the night he vanished. They pored over old symbols, frantically searching for clues the priest may have left behind. And as the lanterns flickered, one elder, Thomas, paused over a page from the priest's journal. There, in faded ink, the priest had written, when it reaches 13, it will no longer need the bell. Thomas swallowed hard and read aloud. A silence followed. What does that mean? Someone whispered. It means, Thomas said, voice trembling, if the 13th toll completes, whatever is beneath the church will be free. The room turned cold. A younger villager shook his head, desperate to deny it. But the priest sealed the bell tower. He caught the rope. Nothing can ring it. But an old woman corrected him softly. Something did ring it, and no one knew how to respond. At 11:20 p.m., long before the final hour, the villagers heard the first unnatural sound. A deep, low vibration, like the earth itself, was humming. Windows rattled. Cups trembled. Dust sifted down from rooftops. Children began to cry. The humming grew louder, not like an earthquake. The symbol behind the church began glowing faintly red through the soil, pulsing like a heartbeat. Dong. The 5th. Children screamed and were shushed. Dong. The 6th. A crack tore down the side of the bell tower. Dong. The 7th. Flames flickered wildly, then stretched upward like they were being pulled by invisible fingers. Dong. The 8th. The church door splintered. Dong. The 9th. The entire building trembled. Dong. The 10th. A gust of frigid wind swept through the village square. Dong. The 11th. Mora raised her chin. It's almost here, she whispered. Dong. The 12th. A sound rose from beneath the church, a long, hollow exhale, like the first breath of something that had not breathed in centuries. The villagers braced themselves. The air went still. Time seemed to freeze. For a moment, nothing happened. No bell, no wind, no movement. And then, dong, the 13th toll. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was a command, a summoning, a door unlocking. The ground beneath St. Marin's split open like rotted wood. A red glow surged upward, lighting the church interior with a pulsating, hellish light. The symbols carved into the soil flared, bright enough to see from every home in the village. And then a hand emerged, blackened, elongated, thin as bone, but strong enough to grip the stone foundation of the church. It pulled itself upward. Villagers screamed and ran. But the elders froze, not because of the creature, but because of what Mara said next. "It is not coming for us." She turned her head slowly toward the hill, overlooking the village. "It's coming for him." With shaking hands, Thomas flipped through the priest's journal again. And then he found it, a final passage. One they had all overlooked. It read, "If I fail to contain it, it will return for the one who opened the ground." The one who opened the ground, Thomas repeated aloud. "What does that mean?" Mara answered, her voice hollow. "It means the creature isn't hunting randomly. It's searching for someone." Mara exhaled slowly and said a name none of them expected. The priest had a son. Gasps rippled through the room. "That's impossible," someone muttered. "He took vows." "He had a son," Mara repeated. "And the boy didn't die in the fire. The priest hid him to protect him." The villagers stared at her. "Where is he now?" Mara turned toward the hill again. "Up there," she whispered. "He returned years ago. Lives alone. Keeps to himself. You know him." The villagers looked at each other in dawning horror. Because there was only one person who lived alone on the hill. Only one person who came to the village once a month for bread and supplies. Only one person who was born the same year the priest vanished. Lucas, the quiet woodworker, the man who never spoke of his past, the man with the same eyes as the priest. The creature had not been summoned accidentally. It had been called by blood. And now, it was coming to claim him. As the 13th toll faded, the creature emerged fully from the church, tall as a man, thin as a spider, its body twisted as though it had been folded unnaturally underground for decades. Its head turned, sniffed, locked onto the hill, and then it moved fast, impossibly fast, bounding across the village square on limbs that bent at horrifying angles. Villagers screamed and scattered as it passed. But nothing slowed it. Nothing even distracted it. It had one purpose, one target, one name, carved into its memory since the night of the fire, Lucas. And the villagers could only watch in terror as the creature raced toward the hill, toward a man who didn't even know he was being hunted. The villagers raced behind the creature, lanterns bobbing wildly through the dark. Their feet pounded the dirt path, leading up the hill, lungs burning with fear. But no matter how fast they ran, the creature ran faster. By the time they reached the base of the hill, it was already halfway up. A long, twisted silhouette leaping from rock to rock like an animal that had never known sunlight. Lucas' Tom shouted, voice cracking. Get out of your house. Run. Far above them, a door opened. A man stepped into the doorway. Confused, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Lucas. Tall, quiet, harmless Lucas. The man who spent his days carving wooden toys for village children, who rarely thanked him. What is happening? He called down. Why are you shouting? But then his eyes lifted. He saw the creature. It was only 10 paces from him. Lucas froze. His breath hitched. The lantern in his hand slipped and crashed to the ground, shattering. He didn't even flinch at the glass. He could only stare, because deep inside him, in some ancient part of his blood he had never understood, he recognized it, not as a monster, but as something he had felt before. Something he had dreamed of, something that had whispered to him as a child. Just as the creature reached Lucas, it abruptly halted. Its limbs bent backward, lowering its body. Its head tilted sideways, analyzing him. The villagers watched in terrified silence as the creature slowly extended a skeletal hand toward Lucas' face. Lucas trembled but didn't move. The hand hovered inches from his cheek. Then, it stopped. It turned toward the villagers. Mara stepped forward, clutching her walking stick. "No," she whispered. "He is not the one who opened the seal." The crowd murmured. "And her pathetic son?" Someone argued. "Yes," Mara said, her voice trembling. "But blood alone is not the key." She lifted her head as if she could see the creature clearly. The priest didn't open the seal alone. The creature let out a low, rattling sound, almost like a growl. Its long finger pointed down the hill, toward the village, not at Lucas. At someone else, someone hiding among the villagers. Someone who had done something long ago and thought it had been forgotten. Thomas frantically scanned the crowd. He demanded, "Who opened the ground that night?" The priest died trying to contain it. But one elder, a man named Garon, suddenly backed away from the group. His face went pale. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "They can't know." Not after all these years. The villagers turned toward him slowly. Mara lifted a trembling hand, pointing directly at him. "He knows the truth." Garon stumbled backward. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." He choked out. "We were desperate. Harvests were failing. Children were starving. We needed something from the old world, something powerful enough to bless the land. We only needed a small blessing," Garon cried. But the seal cracked open and the creature woke. The priest tried to force it back, but the church caught fire. He sealed the exit and made us run. He sacrificed himself. Garon's voice told everyone it was an accident. Silence fell over the hill. Everyone's eyes returned to the creature, to its bony finger, still pointing at Garin. The creature turned away from Lucas and began descending the hill. Each step cracked the earth. The villagers stumbled back. "Run!" Thomas shouted. They scattered in every direction, but the creature didn't chase them. It moved straight toward Garon. The old man fell to his knees, sobbing. "I tried to fix it," he cried. "I prayed every night. I begged the priest for forgiveness. Please." The creature didn't slow. Its shadow fell over him. It extended its hand and placed one slender handkerchief on his forehead. Garon screamed as if 1,000 voices screamed through him. His body lifted off the ground, weightless, limp, frozen, and hung in the air for a moment. The villagers watched in horror as dark smoke poured from Garon's mouth. His eyes, his chest, rising like a cloud into the creature's hand. And then he fell, lifeless. The smoke disappeared into the creature's body, like it was inhaling his very soul. The creature turned. Its body began to fold back into the shape it had taken on the ground, limbs bending inward, spine curling, head lowering as if preparing to descend again. "It's done," Mara whispered. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. "It killed the one who broke the seal," she said. "Was all it ever wanted. It wasn't here to destroy us. It wasn't here to claim Lucas." She breathed deeply, her blind eyes wet with tears. "The priest trapped it, but only because it was too dangerous to leave unbound. It wasn't evil. It was bound by an ancient rule. Punish the one who summons." The villagers stared in stunned silence. The creature crawled toward the crack beneath the church, the red glow fading with it. As it descended back into darkness, the church bell rung one final time. Dong. Soft. Peaceful. Almost like a farewell. And then the glow vanished. The crack sealed. The humming stopped. The night became silent again. By dawn, the villagers gathered at the hill again. Lucas stood alone, staring at the empty space where the creature had stood. Thomas approached him gently. "Did you know?" he asked. Nob Lucas whispered. "But I dreamed of it all my life, of the fire, of my father's fear, and of something deep underground calling my name." Thomas nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are not your father," he said. "And what happened tonight was not your burden. It was the village." The villagers buried Garon beside the church, the first grave added there in over 70 years. And together, they rebuilt the bell tower, plank by plank, stone by stone, not to seal anything inside. How about to honor what had been done to protect them? By the time the sun fully rose, the world felt ordinary again. Quiet. Safe. But the villagers all agreed on one thing. They would never speak of the 13 tolls again. Some stories are too dangerous to tell. Some bells must ring, and some creatures must never be summoned. If you enjoy dark stories like this that reveal secrets buried for decades, subscribe now, because this channel uncovers the stories people were never meant to hear.